Hi all, I'm so glad to bring you today an absolute legend in the field of enterprise excellence, Mr. Art Byrne. Art has such a major background going back to the earliest times of the Japanese and learning from what was done in great companies like Toyota, coming into America, talking right back to the 80s. And Art has taken that through many organizations he's led and really led it as a senior leader. In recent years, Art's been writing books and providing insights and helping organizations, and today we're going to unpack his most recent book. To help you on the topic today, we've got a free download on the Enterprise Excellence podcast website, which is on how to do a Kaizen Blitz. You'll learn a lot about it in the show. If you want to learn more, go get that download from the website. Let's get into the episode.
Welcome to the Enterprise Excellence podcast, where we aim to help create a better future. Learn from our world's experts how to improve and create enduring, high-performance, low-impact enterprises. Learn how to enhance morale, customer and purpose centricity, focus, and calmness. Learn how to create and sustain a culture of excellence at all levels of your organisation.
Hello and welcome. I'm your host, Brad Jevons, broadcasting from Brisbane, Australia. Today's episode is proudly sponsored by the Enterprise Excellence community and group. We invite you to join our monthly virtual community meetings, where you can learn from global experts and connect with fellow members. Past guest speakers include Jeff Leica, Jeff Sutherland, Chris Butterworth, and many more. Events have included virtual excellence tours of organisations such as BHP and US Synthetic. To register for an upcoming event, please visit enterpriseexcellenceacademy.com/community. We look forward to seeing you there. Welcome to episode 184 of the Enterprise Excellence Podcast. It is such a pleasure to have a legend in the field of Lean, Mr. Art Byrne, on the show with us today. Art Byrne has been implementing Lean transformation strategy for over 30 years with organisations such as Danaher Corporation and many others. Art is the author of the books, The Lean Turnaround Action Book, and now the Lean Turnaround Answer Book that I've been thoroughly enjoying. Today we'll be exploring Art's 40 years of observation, which have been captured in his latest book. Let's get into the episode. Art, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you, Brad. Very nice thank you for having me.
I appreciate it. Such an honor. The first question I've got is, why did you first implement Lean in the American organization you're first working with? I can't remember if it was Jakebreak or Wiremold, but what led you to go that path, and how did you make it happen? Because the Japanese weren't actively in America at the time.
Well, actually, my introduction to Lean goes back beyond that. It goes to my first general manager job at the General Electric company, and I was in the lighting business group of the General Electric company, and I was responsible for the high intensity and quartz lamp department. And my manufacturing manager, right before I took over that job, had gone to Japan on a study mission that was promoted by corporate manufacturing of GE at the time. This was very early, this was beginning of 1982. So not too long after the 1979 oil crisis. And, after that, people said, well, gee, Japan doesn't even have any oil. How did they sail through that oil crisis without any problems, particularly Toyota? And what we had learned was it was something called just in time. Well, we didn't really know what that was, but anyway, my manufacturing manager had to give a presentation 6 months later back to corporate about his trip and something that he had implemented when he came back. And so one of the other people that went was one of the suppliers of my company, who was also in the lighting business group. They were supplying us arc tubes for our high pressure sodium lamps. These arc tubes were small, but very expensive and very high technical difficulty to make these arc tubes. Anyway, we just decided that what we would do was create just a Kanban system, a simple Kanban system. So we bought a truck and we created Kanban cards for these arc tubes. There were so many arc tubes per Kanban card, et cetera. And we had our supplier company, our supplier plant, which was about 45 minutes away. They were just going to deliver every day to our plant. So they came every day, and that when they came, we handed them the Kanban cards of the arc tubes we used yesterday. And then the next day they brought those back. That was all we did. That was the simple thing that we did. Now, what happened is that my inventory of arc tubes and dollar value, et cetera, went from 43 days down to 3 days. And their inventory, which was even bigger than mine, because they had a whole room full of nothing but these arc tubes, they went from that to zero. They had no arc tubes. So for the lighting business group in total, we probably went from 100 days of inventory of arc tubes down to 3.
Wow.
But unfortunately, at the time, GE was only into make the month. The only thing that mattered was make the month. They didn't care about cash flow or inventory reduction. It didn't matter to them. So no one gave us any pats on the back. But what I noticed was, gee, we did this great thing with inventory and cash, but the other gains were even better. Our customer service went up. Our quality got better because you couldn't, with only a few arc tubes, you couldn't break them. You had to be very careful. Our productivity went up. Our people were happier. Our shop floor was cleaner and safer, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Our lead times went down. So I said, gee, if all we did was this Kanban thing, and we got all these side benefits, I'm going to make sure that I learn more about this. And any company I run since then, I'm going to try and do this. And so as I moved on to being a group executive at the Danaher Corporation, I wanted to bring this with me, even though we still didn't know that much about it, really. So at Danaher, one of the companies, I was responsible for 8 of the then 13 Danaher companies. And one of them was a company called Jake Brake that made engine retarders for the large Class 8 diesel trucks. And Jake Brake, my office was actually in the Jake Brake building. So I spent a lot of time on the shop floor at Jake Brake. But the guy who was running Jake Brake, who I had appointed as the new president, he had some prior experience with this just-in-time when he worked for John Deere and he worked for Rockwell Industries. So the two of us said, well, gee, if we're going to fix Jake Brake, let's try and use this just-in-time stuff. Let's learn about it and try and use it. So we started out using Anderson Consulting because Anderson was our auditor, and their consulting arm said, oh, we know all about this just-in-time. So they were a typical consulting company, lots of PowerPoint presentations, cost you a lot of money, spent a lot of time, very slow. But we did create a couple of cells, and we started to make some progress. But at the same time, George and I, Konensaker was the president, George Konensaker. So George and I had been reading this book called Kaizen by a guy named Masaki Yamai. And we were learning a lot from that book. And then all of a sudden we found out that Yamai was having a Kaizen seminar in Hartford, which was 2 towns from us.
Wow.
And so we signed up to go. I could only go for the first 2 days, but George took about 5 of his people and they stayed the whole week. And so Yamai wasn't, he was really a writer, and I guess he really came from human resources, not from manufacturing, but he had written a very good book, but he needed someone to teach this class. So he brought in this new company called Shinjujutsu. And Shinjujutsu at the time was just 3 people. They had all worked for their whole career at Toyota. In the last 10 years, they had worked directly for Taiichi Ono, teaching Lean to Toyota's first-tier suppliers. So these were the guys that created this. They were the ones that did the whole thing. And we said, we don't need Arthur Anderson Consulting. We need these guys.
Yeah.
So George spent the week badgering them and getting them to come out to the plant and begging them to look at what we were doing. And they came back on Thursday afternoon when I could be there. Then they came back on Saturday morning, and we basically begged them to come and help us. And their first response was, look, we're too old. It's too far away. We don't speak English, blah, blah, blah. And we said, well, wait a minute. But we have really good steaks, and we have great lobster, and we have golf. We have great golf. Well, I think golf won the argument because they really were all golf fanatics, right? And so they agreed. They agreed to come and work for us. And we said, we'll try it out. So we started really in a sister company of Jake Brake was called Jacobs Chuck. And Jacobs Chuck was in Clemson, South Carolina. This was in August. was really hot. They all show up in suits and ties. We're in blue jeans and golf shirts because we didn't have air conditioning in the plant. It was just hot. So we said, well, we said, let's do an introduction. Then we said, let's do a 45-minute review of drill chucks. That lasted about 10 seconds. They said, look, we have those in Japan too. What do you want to do next? So we said, well, let's do the plant tour. We thought the plant tour would take like an hour and a half. We got about 100 yards out into the plant, maybe not even that. And Mr. Iwata puts his hands up and says, okay, we've seen enough. Let's go back. We said, but Mr. Iwata, we just got out here. That's okay. We saw enough. We go back in the room and he goes up to the board and on big letters, he writes, no good on the board. And he turns around, he looks at it, he says, look, everything here is no good. What do you want to do about it? And that's how we started working with Shin Jiu-Jitsu. Now, I mean, a normal company, if you brought in a consultant and the first thing they did was tell you that everything you were doing was no good, you'd probably fire them on the spot, right? Most companies would. Yeah. But we already knew everything was no good. We just wanted to fix it. And so anyway, we split up into two teams. Iwata, who was the president, wanted to look at assembly. So myself and the president of Jacobs Chuck, we said, well, let's stick with him and see what he has to say. And we set the other team working on our industrial chucks. We had about 8 of our engineers and managers and the 2 other Japanese consultants. So we go out to assembly and we had 4 conveyor belt assembly lines. That's the way we assemble chucks. And so the first thing Iwata says, of course, is, I hate conveyor belt assembly lines. Get rid of them. So we're like, okay. So, anyway, we go back and forth in and out of the office, and he's telling us why we should get rid of them. And so the other team is coming in and whispering in the president of Jacobs Chuck's ear. And I said, Dennis, what's the matter? Why are you people look all upset? He says, yeah, they are. The Japanese want to move about 8 pieces of equipment over lunch. And I said, well, what did you tell them? And he said, well, I told them to go ahead and move them. I said, great, let's go out after lunch and we'll see what's going on. And so we go out after lunch, and there's the 2 Japanese consultants, and they got their ties tucked into their shirts, the sleeves rolled up, and they got pry bars underneath a piece of equipment, trying to pry it loose from the oil that's sticking it to the floor, and they're dragging it across the floor. And they set up the first cell that afternoon, right? Wow. That's how we started. And I said, I really like these guys. I like this kind of consultants. No PowerPoints, no expense. They just do stuff. We in fact, over all the years we worked with Shin Jiu-Jitsu, we never ever got a written report. It was all just, what do you want to work on? Okay, let's work on this. And by the end of the week, we always had a new cell or a new plan or a new arrangement. We didn't have a plan. We had an arrangement. We actually had things working by the end of a week. And so that's the way we started with them. And it just sort of built from there. We had to create all of the things about how do you handle these guys. We had to get interpreters for them. We had to deal with their travel. They come in on a Friday night to work on Monday. What do we do with them over the weekend? Of course, in the summer, we played golf with them. In fact, I said, look, I'm going to go down. We'll go down to this golf shop and I'll buy you each a brand new set of clubs, and I'm going to keep them in my office. So when you come, you can't complain that you played with rental clubs and therefore your game was. You're going to have your own set of clubs. So we go down to the golf store, and it's called the Golfer's Warehouse. Big letters, Golfer's Warehouse. We get out of the car, Iwata looks up and he points up the sign and he says, oh, warehouse. I hate warehouses. And so I said, Mr. Iwata, I understand that, but you're going to really like this warehouse. Well, they were in there for about 3 hours selecting all these clubs, and we kept them in my office, and that's kind of how we started with them, Wow. And then we were their only customer in the United States for 4 years. And then when I left Danaher and Conan Seiko left Danaher, the other group executive, John Constantino, also left Danaher. We just took Shin Jiu-Jitsu with us, and that started to expand their number of clients and people that they work with in the U.S. But for 4 years, we had them all to ourselves, and we just learned so much. Every time they came, we always tried to spend all the time with them on the shop floor. We tried to took them to dinner every night so we could pump them for more information. Because the way it wasn't so much, any technical things. It was just the way they thought about work, the way they looked at work. That was completely different than anything we had ever been taught. And so Conan Saker and I decided, look, whatever they tell us to do, we're going to do, even if we think it's the stupidest idea we ever heard. And about half the time, it was the stupidest idea we ever heard. But we did it anyway. And then we said, okay, but if it doesn't work, and about half the time it didn't work right away, we said one thing is we're never going to let it go back the way it was. Whatever, we set it up for a reason. We understood the reason. It didn't quite work, but we're never going to let it go back because, of course, the normal reaction of any company is if you set up a new cell and it doesn't work, well, let's go back the old way because this doesn't work. And we said, no, you can't let that happen. You have to just work at it and keep forcing your way through it until you get it to work. And that was one of the best decisions we ever made because that's what allowed us to break through because every time, almost every time they didn't work right away. There was something wrong. You put a bunch of new equipment in a cell, but you would never maintain this equipment before because you were in a and you didn't need to. So now you put it in a cell and a piece of equipment goes down, well, the whole cell shuts down. Before in a batch, if a piece of equipment went down, you could run everything else and catch up later with the other piece. And it didn't really matter. Now it mattered tremendously. And so again, we had to learn, well, gee, we can't let this equipment go down with blah, blah, blah. So that was, those were some of the early things that we learned with them. And all of my learning really, the main important things came from what they were teaching us. And they didn't teach us any kind of business things or whatever. They just taught us how to see the waste, how to run a Kaizen, how to improve. And myself and Conan Saker, we said, we both had some prior strategic planning in our backgrounds. So we looked at this and we said, this stuff that they're teaching us, this just in time, this Toyota production system, this is the greatest strategic weapon we've ever seen. And so one day at lunch, we said, Mr. Iwata, this is the greatest strategic weapon we've ever seen. How can Toyota let you guys loose on the world to go teach other people how to think this way? And he just laughed at us and he said, well, look, I can tell you all about the Toyota production system. I can take you to see the Toyota production system, but I bet you can't go home and do it. And that was one of the most insightful things I've ever heard. And it's true to this very day. I think it's still true. I can show you, tell you, but you can't do it. Not on your own. You're going to need some help to do it.
What do you think drives that? Because it's been so true, hasn't it? Like I guess you and I were talking before the show. My passion's about sustaining these excellence journey because you see so many fail. I see so many people that don't even do the cell because they're like, oh, something will break down. Let's just stay in a batch, so I don't even do the cell, the U-shaped cell. But what do you feel is the main reason that most companies just can't put it together?
Well, I think, first of all, if your whole career you were rewarded and kept going up the ladder based upon what you were doing, and then what you were doing was batch, right? Some sort of a traditional batch approach, then that's what that's what works for you. You're not going to go off of that and try something completely different because lean is completely different from that, obviously. And so it's a big risk. You don't want to take the risk, number one. So just getting people to start because of that reason is very, very difficult. The second thing is about 90%, maybe more than 90% of the people who start or try lean, they do it because they look at it as a cost reduction program.
Yeah.
They don't look at it strategically at all. They just look at it as this would be a good cost reduction. So what they do is they hand it off to their VP of operations and everything else stays in a batch. Their production planning, the way they sell, the way they develop new products, everything else stays in a batch. But they just tell the manufacturing guy, take this lean stuff and cut the costs. And what they mean by that, of course, is, cut the head count.
Yeah.
And of course, if you start doing lean and the first thing you do is fire some people, the lean program is going to stop right away. because no one's going to help you anymore. Hey, wait a minute, we just did that and you fired my sister. That's not going to be very good. So I think those are the two main reasons. People have been trained a certain way and they don't want to do it. And secondly, they think of it as a cost reduction program. And maybe you could throw in a third reason, which is, well, if you think about lean in general, it's nothing but a series of leaps of faith, right? Because every time you say, okay, let's create a new cell, or let's create this something new, we're going to move some equipment around, we're going to do something like that. In the back of your mind, there's always this question of, well, what if it doesn't work? And so someone's always going to say, oh yeah, but that'll never work. And what about when this happens? And so you get right up to the edge of doing it, and then you back off because you're afraid of it. You're afraid of the leaps of faith. And the only way you can push through the leaps of faith is if the CEO is the one pushing you through. And if the CEO is a little nervous, or they're worried about having a problem, they're not going to push you through it. They're going to wait and hope they can get a consensus among all their people that this is what we ought to do. But you're never going to get that, because you're always going to get all these excuses of, well, that worked in the automotive industry, we're not in automotive, or we tried that a couple of years ago, it didn't work, or I can take you down the list. I've heard all the excuses, but those excuses, they tend to have real weight with somebody who has never done anything except in a batch. And so trying to make the leaps of faith, it's just not going to happen.
Yeah, that's brilliant. So the most senior person really backing it and being willing to go and really put faith in it, because it's gonna be tough, because like you've mentioned, Art, when you implemented Kanban, first of all, in GE, it puts pressure on the system because other things have to step up really quick. And then when you put your first U-shaped cells into JBrain, it's going to put pressure on the system, because all of a sudden you have to be diligent on maintenance. Machines can't break down. But the flow on from that diligence that comes and that extra improvement that happens is huge, because it flows onto so many other things. I can really sense that with what you said, but you need that. You mentioned needs to be owned and led from the top, because there are some risks to take and there's some rapid change that has to happen.
Every industry has what I call some lore, right? In other words, people that think, oh, this is the only way it's possible to do that in this industry. And if you combine that with the leaps of faith problem, it explains a lot about why companies don't do this. For example, years ago, I was on the board of directors of a company that made jewelry. Mostly it was women's rings, gold and precious stones and that kind of thing. And they were struggling a bit, and they asked me to come down. This was in South Miami Beach or something. They said, I said, well, how long does it take you to make a ring? And they said, 8 weeks. I said, 8 weeks? It's only that big, What can you possibly do to it for 8 weeks? And they said, come on, we'll come out on the floor, we'll show you. So I said, well, it was all batch. Everything was a batch. Every operation was separate. I said, well, if you do it that way, I guess it'll take you 8 weeks. So I turned around and set up the first cell that they ever had. And we could do it. We could do a ring. I said, any order that came in today, we can ship tomorrow. So instead of 8 weeks, we were 2 days. Order comes in today, we can ship it tomorrow. And our productivity went way up, quality got better, everything else came along with that. But that's something that they couldn't, even though they could go out on the shop floor and see it, the existing management still couldn't grasp it. You could go see it, but you couldn't understand it, which is kind of strange to me. But the lore in the industry, I ran into 2 or 3 other jewelry companies after I started this. And so I was curious. I said, how long does it take you to make a ring? They all said 8 weeks. And so I said, well, gee, think about what would happen if you're in that industry and you wanted to hire a new VP of operations. He's going to come in with the mentality that it takes 8 weeks. He's never going to get you to 2 days. He can't. It's impossible for him to do that, because he's been trained over 20 years that to make a ring takes 8 weeks. Yeah. Right. So when you combine the the leaps of faith with the lore that exists in different industries. And of course, if you're going to hire somebody to be your new VP of operations in the jewelry industry, one of the requirements is going to be he has to have prior jewelry experience. So along with that comes 8 weeks.
Yeah.
So you combine a couple of those things and you can start to see why companies just can't do this or can't move away from where they were.
No. And habit is such a powerful thing in humans, isn't it? So
Yeah,
that
yeah.
law and habit just plays on. I'd like to, from your book, um, I instantly went and read on Kaizen Blitz, and it gave me some insights because the stereotypical consultant approach, and hey, I've been there, is to roll out a whole heap of PowerPoint training and classroom-based training, and you might throw some Lego in there and a few practicals, and people are away for a day or two or three in the classroom. Can you talk to the listeners about that versus the Kaizen Blitz learning by doing approach and why
Yeah,
the Kaizen
absolutely.
approach is so powerful?
Well, let's back it up a little bit more. The way most companies solve problems is they create a team, almost always just salaried people, to go and study the problem and come up with a solution. So let's say that they meet once a week and this goes on for a couple of months. And after a couple of months, they come up with a solution. Now, they haven't done anything. All they have is a plan. Now, that plan has to be approved by higher management. That might take another month, right? And then they're going to get to work doing something. Kaizen, on the other hand, we start on a Monday and we expect on Friday to have a new cell or a new setup reduction or whatever it is that we're working on. So we go from a planning operation to a doing operation. And when you started talking about the training, et cetera, we gave our people a little bit of training, but lean is really learn by doing. So the main training, the main learning is going to come by actually being on a Kaizen and doing something for the whole week. And so what we settled in on was let's not do a lot of training. Let's do if you're going to be on a Kaizen next week, on Friday afternoon, we want you to come together for a couple of hours, and we're going to go over the tools that we're going to use, the production control charts and those kind of things that we used in a Kaizen. And then we on Monday morning you start. And so because if I take you and put you in 3 days of training and you never learn, you never use that training for 6 more months, by the time I get you to use it, you forgot about it because you just went back to your job. So what was the point? You just wasted a lot of people's time training them in something they're going to forget over the next 5 or 6 months before you ask them to use it. And so I think there's an enormous difference in the way people solve problems and the way that we solve problems with Kaizen. And the results of our Kaizen, of course, are so dramatic that it's pretty hard to say, well, gee, that wasn't, that we don't want to do that anymore because you got all these incredible gains every time you do one. And if you do one and you do another, then I don't see why people ever stop, but they do. You'll see someone do a setup reduction Kaizen and at WireMold, when I was running WireMold, all of our setup reduction Kaizens, which were 1 week long, we got a 90% reduction in setup time in 1 week, every time, every kind of equipment, right? But I've seen companies see that and say, well, gee, that was interesting, but it doesn't apply to us, so we don't want to do it. And you say, well, wait a minute, we got a 90% reduction. It didn't cost us any money. What do you mean you don't want to do it?
Yeah.
But that's just the mentality. The mentality is stuck in, I don't understand why I want to reduce setup time because I run everything in a large batch anyway. So setup time is completely irrelevant to me in my batch state.
Yeah. It's amazing, isn't it? Again, back to that law and that set thinking. Do you mind sharing for the listeners who's involved in a Kaizen Blitz? Because I've seen people roll out Kaizen Blitz where it's just engineers in the team and they just come in and change everything. But who were the type of people that were involved in a Kaizen Blitz team when you were running them throughout organizations you led?
Yeah, I think the most important thing about that is you really need to have sort of half salaried and half hourly people. And we really always wanted to have the people, if we were going to go in and create a new cell in an area, we wanted people from that area, people that worked in that area to be on the team. Because the best ideas for removing the waste are always going to come from the people that are doing the work. They know what's wrong. They know what's a problem, and they'll tell you if you ask them. But they hadn't been saying anything for a long time because no one ever listened to them before. And so I think having the setup for a Kaizen team should always be half salaried and half hourly. And the salary people don't have to be from that area, one or two of them maybe, but otherwise we would have a team of like 8 or 10 people. They were on the Kaizen for the full week. They didn't do anything else but the Kaizen. The Kaizen started at 7 or 8 in the morning and went into the night. We didn't just stop at 5 o'clock. A lot of the teams would send out for dinner, send out for some pizza, and keep working until 9 or 10 at night. And but when you have the hourly people on the team, you're going to get a lot better ideas, number one, and then you're going to get buy-in from them to keep those ideas going forward as you go forward. Because otherwise, if it's just a bunch of engineers and they come in, then they're just doing something to the people. They're not doing something with the people. They're doing something to the people. And it's real easy for those kind of things to just go backwards in a big hurry. Because as soon as you turn around, everybody just goes back to the way they used to do it, and then you have to scramble around to get it back again.
Yeah.
Whereas if the hourly people are there, I mean, we did at Wiremo, we had tremendous results. I just mentioned with setup reduction, and for example, we had a 150-ton punch press, coil fed, and a big progressive die. Historically, it took 3 hours and 10 minutes to change that over. We got that down to 1 minute. Now, a lot of the key ideas in how we did that came from the two operators that were running the press. But of course, if you said, well, gee, we used to ask you to spend 3 hours and 10 minutes to change this over. Now you can do it in 1 minute. They understand right away that you did something really good for them, right? And that they contributed to that, and that they were part of this. They did this, and so you get tremendous buy-in. You start to get culture change as a result of that, because that's what's really important. So I think having hourly people on the Kaizen team is really important.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think for our listeners too, I just want to note on that. A lot of people do the big training to give people certifications, right? So certifications is a big driver I see out there. Oh, put them on 3 days training, get certified. There's organizations now out there, everyone, that will certify based on competence. You don't have to sit people in classrooms for 2-3 days to get certification. So LCS linked with Cardiff University is one of them, and there's many more. So I just thought I'd put that out there, because a lot of people go, oh, we have to do the full-blown classroom training because people want their certifications. It's not the case anymore. I don't know if it ever was, really. Yeah.
Well, that really applies when you think about people that are doing statistical process control. That's what I'm trying to think about. Anyway, they do that and they say, now we're going to, we have to have green belts and black belts and all that kind of thing, right? And I always say, well, why do you want to do that? Why do you want to hand out these belts? So you just put them in the drawer. And usually when you train somebody in Six Sigma like that was the word I couldn't come up with. When you train somebody in Six Sigma and okay, now I'm a green belt, now I'm a black belt, then they just go back to their regular job.
Yeah.
Right. And then occasionally, maybe every 6 months or 4 months, you call them out, you got this problem, and you form a team of black belts and green belts, and they study it for a couple of months, etc. And I say, well, why do you want to give away these? Oh, because they have to have certification.
Yeah.
I said, what's the point? I mean, you're running a business. You're not running a karate class. And so why do you need to give black belts and green belts? Well, I said, no, just promote them.
Yeah.
Teach them how to do this. And then when they do a great job, promote them. Don't give them belts, promote them.
Yeah.
So it's just a different way of thinking, really. I mean, people will still give black belts and green belts, and they'll think that's the right thing to do. And I don't have a real objection to it. I just think it's kind of stupid.
Yeah. It's the it's the outcome of moving things forward and making things better for everyone and those we serve, which is important. Which Art, I wanted to quiz you on your thoughts on strategic alignment. Where what part do you feel, if any, that a company to move forward, having a clear purpose and vision and goals and being able to connect people to it, how important is that or not in your mind? And particularly connecting the front line to it as part of this journey.
Yeah. Well, I think it's critically important. If you think about what a lean company is going to compete on its operational excellence, I mean, that's really what it's going to do. And as a result, you need to have some operational excellence targets that you're going to aim for. So we use just 5 things at Wiremold, and these 5 things are not traditional measurements in terms of, I mean, some of them are, but they're really aimed at processes, not at results. So the 5 things that operational excellence targets that we set were, number 1, 100% on-time customer service, not 97.7 or something like that. 100%. You had to be 100%. Number 2, we wanted a 20% productivity gain every year. Number 3, we wanted a 50% reduction in defects every year. Number 4, we wanted a first target of 20 inventory turns. Now, when I set that target, by the way, we were at 3. So everybody said, "What, are you crazy?" And then the last one was, we wanted the 5S and visual control to be in existence every place, office, factory, everywhere. So those 5 things were what we said we wanted to do. Now, the key thing of setting goals like that is they have to be stretch targets. They have to be things that people think that's impossible. We can't do that. If I told you I want you to go from 3 inventory turns to 5, you might think, well, that's not so hard. Maybe we can do that. We'll just keep doing what we're doing. We'll just do it better. But that's never going to happen. You're going to struggle to get to 4. But if I ask you to go to 20, that's really different. You can't just keep doing what you were doing. You got to change everything to do that, right? And so by having that and having those targets and doing a lot of Kaizen to try and make them happen, pretty soon it becomes pretty normal in the company that, okay, well, this is what we do here. This is the targets that we have. And then trying to get people to go in the same direction. What we did is we stopped the big monthly and financial reviews, which most companies do. And instead, we just took these 5 things. We organized into value streams as away from functional departments. And then we gave the value stream leaders, which in our case were product families, so the product team leaders, we just gave all of them the 5 things. Said, these are the 5 things we want you to do. And then we had them report to myself and my staff every week on their progress on these 5 things. It was a very simple meeting. They only had 10 minutes to present because there were only 5 things. And they had to tell us how they were doing on the 5 things. And then they had to tell us what Kaizen they planned for the next week. Okay. So now we got everybody first of all, we got everybody looking forward. Everybody's focused on the processes and looking forward as to how we're going to get the processes better so that eventually our results will get better. And second, these team leaders, the value stream leaders, they had about 85% of all the people in the company reported to them. So now all of a sudden, not only have I got 5 outrageous targets, but I've got everybody working on them. So you got the whole organization going in exactly the same direction.
Yeah. And you got a weekly cadence of strategy execution. That is fast and awesome.
Yeah. Every week we did it. And if you think about the other way around, which is sort of what I call make the month, which is what most companies do, at the end of the month, they close the books. It takes them 3 weeks. And then once they've closed the books, they spend 3 days or so reviewing the numbers and having a big meeting and all that kind of stuff. But, the books didn't get closed for 3 weeks. So they're always looking backwards at something that already happened. They can't do anything about what already happened, but they're going to spend a lot of time talking about it.
Yeah.
Right. And they're not focused on the processes at all. They're focused on the results. And because they're focused on results that already happened, not much change is going to happen. Because if you don't change your processes, the result that you just got was based on those processes. And if the processes stay the same, the results are going to be pretty much the same anyway.
Yeah.
So the whole thing is backwards. And instead, by having these 5 targets and reviewing them every week and deploying them down to 85% or so of all the people working on them, we had everybody kind of going in the same direction.
Yeah. And what would you say became the human motivational factor behind it? So you had clear targets, a weekly cadence. What would you say created the rallying cry where you sort of won people's minds with it, their hearts and minds with it too? What was that was going on at the time?
I would say the key thing really is just the Kaizen activity.
Yeah, okay.
Kaizen,
Involvement.
yeah, Kaizen was the way people learn. Kaizen's a learning activity, a doing activity. And we really worked hard to make sure that everybody was on a Kaizen.
Mm,
You know, all the hourly people, all the salary people, we wanted you to be on multiple Kaizens. We tried to do 2 Kaizens per facility per week. I mean, per month. No, 2 Kaizens per facility per week. So that's a pretty aggressive target. We couldn't even do it in the summertime because our volume jumped up 35-40%, and we just couldn't keep up. But we could do them in the office during that period of time. But by just having a very aggressive Kaizen program and getting everybody on a Kaizen, that's what brought people together. And that's what they learned a lot. You know, if you're on a Kaizen and you went from 3 hours and 10 minutes setup time to 1 minute, that sticks in your mind. That's like, wow, what, I couldn't believe we did that. And if you're on the team that did that, you feel pretty good about it,
yeah.
right? And then you want to see what somebody else did, and you find, oh, this other team did something even more amazing. And then it starts to dawn on people that, gee, look at what the gains are that we're getting, and look what's happening to the company as a result of this. So the Kaizen is really, in my mind, what builds the culture and what changes the mentality of people.
Yeah, I can imagine, Art. Like you've got a team who are used to not being involved in much, and then the company shifts to a direction where all of a sudden I'm learning, but I'm making a difference here to where the company wants to go, and I'm hitting results, and I'm enjoying it with Fred, Mary, and Doug, who are part of the team. And like you said, we're having some pizzas, and because we're working late and there's camaraderie, I get what you're saying there. Why Kaizen became the motivational purpose. It's like a respect for people type
Right.
of position.
Yeah, and I mean, if you just go back to the history of, for example, the U.S. automotive industry, the real mantra that they had for many, many years was never stop the line. And then
Mm,
along comes kind of Toyota, and Toyota says always stop the line. They
yeah.
created an and-on cord. You could pull the cord and then just stop the line. So what happens? Well, when you stop the line, if every time you stop the line, you solve a problem and you solve it permanently, guess what's happening? What's really happening is a lot of learning. A lot of learning is taking place, right? So you went from a non-learning culture to a learning culture. And every time you stop the line, you get an improvement, and you got another improvement, and you get another one. And the guys who don't stop the line, they never got any of that gain. They just took the cars off to the side and fixed the defects, and that was what happened. So just a simple thing like that, makes an enormous difference in how people think, how involved they are, the respect for people. Hey, that was my idea that helped do that. I was the one who helped do that. And before I was just this hourly person, no one ever listened to me. And now when I come to work, I feel like I'm respected, and I feel I want to, I want to contribute some more.
Yeah, that's awesome. Uh, can we chat for a second on the topic of leadership behavior? So with your journey, you had strategic alignment. You'd connect the team to the goals of the company and where you're going. There was a strong purpose in Kaizen because there was that respect for people. I was involved. I can make a difference as a frontline crew. What did you find, and how did you go about building the right leadership behavior to actually sustain that respect? Because I'm guessing at the same time, you could have had some leadership behaviors there, which could have hurt that position of respect as much as help it.
Yeah, you're right. The harder change is getting the leadership to change. That's a much more difficult problem, I think, because particularly at the senior leadership level. These are people that are very accomplished. They're smart. They've been in the business maybe for a long time. They got to where they are because of things that they did, and they have certain beliefs and certain ways of doing things. And now you come in and you want to turn it all upside down. So the way that we approached that really was, first of all, put everybody on a Kaizen team. The first Kaizens that we did at Warren, all of my direct reporting staff, I forced them out onto the floor to be on a Kaizen, right? Because I needed them to understand what could happen and what was this really like. And so people like from marketing or sales or human resources, they thought, well, this doesn't apply to me. This lean stuff that can apply to me. Oh yes, it does. We want you on the Kaizen team. We want you involved in this whole thing because we have to work together. Doing lean is a team sport. It's not an individual thing, and you can't have just operations working on implementing lean. And the sales force over here is trying to sell in big batch orders and give volume discounts and do things that are stupid. So everybody has to be on that. So originally or initially, I had everybody on Kaizen teams. That helped a lot. And then I forced them to be on a lot of Kaizen teams. I think that the senior management, for example, should be on at least 5 to 6 full 1-week Kaizens per year. And that the CEO should be on 12 full week Kaizens per year. In other words, one every month, at least when you start, because the CEO has to commit to becoming a lean expert. Otherwise, if they don't understand lean enough and what's possible, how can you expect them to push their team to do what's possible? They won't. They just won't push that hard because they think, well, that won't happen. I can't do that. If you said, I want you to go from 3 hours and set up time to 1 minute, oh no, in their mind, they would say they wouldn't understand how you could do that. But if they became a lean expert, they'd say, oh, I've seen that happen a bunch of times. So yeah, I want you to do that. So that was really the key, was getting them to do that. And then the other thing was, making them work as a team. That was a little more difficult because, they would come in and they would want to do this. They'd say, hey, this didn't happen because he created the problem. And I just said, look, I'm not going to referee that. We're going to sit down and talk about it together and et cetera. And so eventually my senior management team, they decided that they needed to go offsite and work together on how they were going to become a team. And I think they hired somebody who counseled people, a marriage counselor, right? Something like that. And they went outside for a few days, but they came back. Okay, we're going to work together as a team. We're not going to be off bad mouthing each other when something goes wrong, et cetera. And so, it was a combination of things, but it took longer to get the management team on board. And then the bigger issue even than that was down in the lower management ranks, particularly the ranks that used to be functional managers, where they just told people what to do and they didn't listen to anybody. That was harder to get at because we didn't see that every day. So we created an employee survey every year. And in that survey, we buried about 5 questions about what do you think of your boss? Because over here, we're talking about the value of people and respect for people. And every day they got a boss that's not respecting them at all.
Yeah.
So they're seeing 2 different things. They like this one, but they still don't, it's not coming through to them. And that allowed us to kind of weed out those managers. And first, we'd have a discussion with them. And if that didn't work, we'd have maybe another. And eventually we'd have to get them out of that role because we had to get, everything had to align. We had to line everything up. And so if they're hearing from the CEO one thing and from their direct boss they're hearing the opposite, that's not going to work. So you have to get down to that layer. That was a little harder to get at, to be honestly.
Yeah. And Art, did you find, I guess your leaders were leading from the front or as part of doing Kaizen blitzes and being out there. What did you do around the position of, leaders getting out to the workplace and just going to learn, in between Kaizen blitzes? Was that part of the culture? Get out to the floor and look and learn about what's happening?
Yes, we try to encourage that as best we can. But one of the things that we really encouraged was that when we were doing Kaizens, every day we had what we called a leaders meeting around 4 o'clock in the afternoon to kind of summarize what had happened today and what are they going to do tomorrow. And I made all of my direct reports come to those meetings. So even if you weren't on a Kaizen team that week, if you were in town, you had to show up at those meetings every day. And I showed up at them as well. But that gave senior management an idea of what was really going on. Number one, it gave them an ability to input their ideas or whatever, suggest some things, and it sort of just brought a lot of things together. So that was another, I think, key ingredient was having senior management sit in on these daily update meetings that we had while Kaizens were going on.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's a constancy. You're constantly out on the floor in those meetings. That's brilliant.
Right.
Hey, Art, for leaders and business improvement leaders or quality managers out there at the moment, anyone, what would be like your 2-minute tip to them going forward? Apart from definitely they should get your book and have it as a reference guide forevermore. But what would be your 2-minute tip to them with trying to make lean stick and actually get the outcomes culturally and performance wise?
Well, I think, I just go back to the number one thing, of course, is Kaizen and getting people involved in that. And then you have to follow up on the Kaizens. You have to make sure that they stick. That's the more difficult part. Doing the Kaizen's pretty easy, and you're going to get great results, but making it stick is hard. And so that means you got to have a good Kaizen promotion office that's going to follow up. You got to have managers that follow up, that kind of thing. And if you can do that, if you can do a lot of Kaizen and then do a lot of good follow up on that, uh, things will change fairly rapidly because the results that you get are so enormous that it's pretty hard to deny them. And if you can hold on to them, I always think of Kaizen and doing this as sort of like 3 steps forward, 1 step back, all the time, because people naturally want to go back to the way they did things before. And getting standard work to stick and getting people to do that, it's difficult, quite honestly. So follow up is real important here.
Yeah. And I could imagine, Art, too, you mentioned earlier, like establishing a visual workplace where performance is visual and process is visual plays a massive part in that too, to the
Right.
sustainability of it.
Yeah, I think it's critically important, particularly as you're starting out, because when you're doing lean, you're not looking at things on how many did I make this month. You're looking at things hour by hour. So you need something on the shop floor that says, what did I do the first hour? What was I supposed to do? What did I do the second hour? What was I supposed to do? And some comments to that says, why didn't those marry up? What went wrong, et cetera, et cetera. So we just had simple flip charts at every cell that had the hour by hour results of what was going on. And so you could go back out and look at the last 5 or 6 days. And a lot of times what you see was the reasons why they didn't make the number was the same reasons. So then you knew exactly what you had to fix.
Yeah.
But it also involved everybody in a cell could see what was going on. They could see hour by hour where they were. And the motivation of that is hard to neglect. And it's sort of like, if you go to a sports, a sports game, a baseball game or a soccer game or something, and you come in 5 minutes late, 10 minutes late, what's the first thing you do? You look
Yeah.
up at the scoreboard, right? See, well, what did I miss? Right? Where are we? That's the first thing you do. Well, this is the same idea, but you're going to see hour by hour, if you post what the result was and what you were supposed to do, you're going to see everybody in the cell will look up and say, hey, what did we do? What are we doing? Are we okay? Oh, we're all right. We're fine. Or gee, we're going to have to go a little faster. Or, we're falling behind. Why are we falling behind? So I think that's a really critical thing. The visual control is really important because if you go in a regular traditional factory, it's hard to know what's going on. There is no visual control. There might be lots of, computer reports someplace you could go dig up things, but there's nothing you can see when you're just walking around. You have no idea where you are.
Yeah. I love that sporting analogy, Art. We have a lot of particularly frontline and supervisory leaders around the world going out in the sporting fields with blank grass and not much else. That's
Yeah, I know.
it's pretty common across our world, isn't it? Versus they
Yeah,
can get out in the sporting field, see the goal, know how they're performing, see the field of play. It's such a
uh,
great analogy. Yeah. Hey, Art, how can people get hold of your book and connect if they want to learn more?
yeah. The Lean Turnaround Answer book is now out on Amazon. It's on hardcover on Amazon, or you can get it. You can get a Kindle electronic copy as well. So that's the best place to do it, and I would recommend it for everybody. I think it will help a lot of companies start down the lean path or get restarted on the lean path if they had started and kind of fell behind, because we explain all the basic stuff of the lean fundamentals. Why are those important? We talk about management issues. We talk about structural issues. We talk about how to implement this, and there's just a lot of good examples and articles that would help people to say, oh, okay, I kind of get that. I can see now. Now what I see what I was doing wrong.
Yeah, and I could vouch for it, Art, because I've had the book for a month or two now, and I've just been referring to different sections as I'm like, okay, I'm keen to learn more on this topic. What's Art got in here? And you've got something covering every element, and really well written articles in there too. Because I understand it comes from a blog that where you had this article that you were doing for years on different topics, and you pulled it all together.
Right. Well, if you go back, my first book, The Lean Turnaround, was about 10 or 12 years ago, and that was just aimed at senior executives to explain why you want to do this stuff, why lean is the best strategic approach to running any company, basically. And that was a pretty popular book, and I got a lot of comments from people. They said, "Gee, Bart, we really love your book, but how do you really do this stuff?" So I said, "Oh, okay, well." Then I wrote the second book, which was the Lean Turnaround Action Guide, to try and answer that question: how do you really do this? And the Lean Turnaround Action Guide, which won a Shingo Prize, by the way,
Oh, wow.
it's really like it's really a case study, like a business case study, because we took a company and then we bought it and then we converted it to lean step by step, and we answered all the questions that people had about why this wouldn't work and all that kind of thing. And we showed you results as a traditional company, and later on we showed you the results under lean and how different those turned out to be. And so between the two books, that generated even more questions. And over about the last 8 years or so, I've been writing a monthly article for the Lean Enterprise Institute. They have a lean post that they do put out every week. And about once a month, I wrote an article, and I wrote 100 articles for them over about 8 years. And I said, gee, nobody's ever going to have read all 100 articles. It spans too big a time frame. But I don't want to lose all these things. I think they're valuable for anybody that wants to think about lean. And so we decided to put them in a book. So we cut them down to 70 of the articles. And I think that really the Lean Turnaround Answer book literally answers just about every question people could have about lean, and some questions that they might not have, but they should have.
It's awesome, Art. And I can totally vouch for it. Like, I've read all your books and have gained massive value from them all, especially with my passion of how do you make the stuff stick. Like if you're listeners, if you're interested in how to sustain a journey versus the typical go and do some training and things sort of fall over and don't really work, yeah, read these books. Well, Art, thank you so much, mate, for everything you have done throughout your career and everything you continue to do. Really appreciate you coming on the podcast and helping us all create a better future.
Well, thank you for having me, and I hope that it helps a lot of companies.
Will do. Thanks so much, Art. Bye for now.
Thank you.
What a great episode. Remember, you can visit our website, enterpriseexcellencepodcast.com/downloads to get a hold of the document on how to do a Kaizen Blitz, which will give you some further information on the approach and technique to use and the process involved with it. There were 3 key takeaways for me from this episode. Firstly, the power of a Kaizen Blitz to bring focus on the biggest challenge now, the right improvement to do, involve frontline team members, bring in senior leadership into the event, really that practical learning by doing and getting results over the week, and keeping the Kaizen Blitz routine going, where you're looking to involve everyone over time in a blitz to really move things forward. The other key takeaway for me was strategic alignment to it. Art really connected teams through meaningful measures and goals that he set with the team to help them target where to focus Kaizen effort. It's what will help us move forward and get that step forward, and then the next Kaizen Blitz to move forward again. The third key takeaway for me was the power of purpose just in showing respect to frontline, involving senior leadership in the event and building that extra respect of, equality and teamwork and the learning that comes from it. And that motivating factor purely being in this human space of people being respected for their knowledge, being involved, being able to make a difference, getting to know senior leaders and seeing each other as equals and teammates to actually move things forward, actually building dramatic purpose and motivation in a company. It's a real example of, purpose and motivation coming through actions rather than talk. And I think it's a really great opportunity for organisations to learn from this and think, wow, is this a way that we can really engage all levels of the business, create motivation, create constant learning, and move everything forward to create a better future. Thanks again for your time and your knowledge and everything you have done and continue to do, Art. I've learned so much from our discussion and your books. Appreciate everything you've done. Bye for now.